And we're back. Greetings, everyone. This is Lucian Vâlsan, broadcasting from Cluj-Napoca, Transylvania. As always, alongside with me is Jon Gunnarsson, broadcasting from Deutschland, and our producer, James Huff, making sure everything works just fine, broadcasting from the States. And welcome to another no-title episode. Hi there, Jon.
Hi there, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. The reason there is no title to this episode is because there has already been an episode titled "The Silly Place," and this one is going to be half of that. And the other reason for the lack of the title is I simply forgot about it because it's so damn hot.
Yeah, it's also quite hot here. Probably not as hot as on your end, but it's like 30 degrees, and that is already too hot for me.
Are you kidding me? That's very cold and nice and fantastic. Can I move there? For the Wednesday, Thursday, today, tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow. It's a code red for extreme heat. Just a few hours ago, like 4 hours ago, I was at my colleague with whom I make the Romanian language videos, and we put out a thermometer outside on his balcony. And that thermometer, that's how we found out, it actually has a limit to plus 50 degrees. It doesn't measure beyond that. Even though it's an electronic one, if you go after 50 degrees Celsius, it says just high temperature. And yeah, it showed high temperature. So it was warmer than 50 degrees.
Did you put it in the sun or what?
Yeah, in the sun.
Yeah,
and,
okay.
and in the shadows, it was like 42, 43.2,
Okay.
something like that. So it wasn't really that much of a difference, although I don't know how much beyond 50 degrees it was in the sun. Maybe it was 60, maybe it was just 52. I have no idea, but still, I mean, remarkably hot. And today was hotter than yesterday, and probably tomorrow it's going to be even worse than today, and Sunday is expected to be the peak of that, and then next week some rain, and hopefully a little bit less than 50 degrees in Celsius. That would be fantastic. It's just amazing. And it's only this part. I mean, it's Eastern Hungary and Western Romania, basically. The hottest portion from almost all of Europe. Maybe Southern Spain could be even warmer than that. But other than that, I don't think there's any other place in Europe where it's that bloody hot. I mean, it's one of those rare moments where in Bucharest and in Greece, it's actually colder than here. That rarely happens. It's just once in a decade, or probably even rarer than that. So yeah, please, can I move there? 30 degrees, that sounds fantastic. That was like 2 weeks ago. Right. So other than the unusually hot weather, any other unexpected things happening?
No, not really. Just the
Not
usual.
really. Yeah, well, I'm counting down the days until I leave to Georgia, and so in a way, it's very nice that it is very extreme hot weather now, because in Georgia that's normal. I mean, I was just looking at the weather forecast whilst I'll be in Georgia and Armenia, and the hottest days here are the low points during summertime in that part of Caucasus. It's gonna be I'm gonna lose a lot of weight because of the sweating. That's for sure. That's for sure. Right. So a moderately long news section, although longer than last episode, but shorter than 2 episodes ago when it was unusually long. So yeah, let's kick it in.
Okay, the first one comes from the Daily Mail from the UK. Women don't struggle more than men to juggle work and family life, study finds. Stereotypes and media accounts would have you believe that women struggle more with work-family conflicts than men do. But new research has shown that women and men report similar levels of the struggle in terms of both work-life interfering with the family and family interfering with work. The study also revealed that men and women reported similar levels of work-family conflict regardless of the level of gender equality in their country. The study, led by a researcher at the University of Georgia, was a meta-analysis when data from multiple studies is combined to learn more about a specific area of research. The researchers spent several years examining more than 350 studies conducted over 3 decades, where half were published decades ago and half were published in 2010 or later. These studies included more than 250,000 participants from across the world. Quote, we essentially found very little evidence of differences between women and men as far as the level of work-family conflict they report, said Dr. Kirsten Shockley, an assistant professor of psychology at the University of Georgia and the lead author of the study. This is quite contrary to the common public perception. The way this issue is presented in the media frames the way we think about it, and it creates a perpetual cycle. Women hear that other women are struggling with this issue, so they expect they will experience greater work-family conflict. There's also some socialization for it being okay for women to talk more about it than men. Previous research has found that men often don't feel comfortable discussing work-family corners because of fears of being work-family concerns because of fears of being stigmatized, threats to their masculinity, or negative career repercussions. However, men may feel more comfortable discussing these conflicts in anonymous confidential surveys, such as those used in the studies analyzed. Quote, I do think it's harming men who are silently struggling and experiencing the same amount of work-family conflict, but no one is acknowledging it, said Dr. Shockley. In recent years, men have increasingly become primary caregivers for young children, and fathers are spending more time caring for their children and completing chores on average. However, women still spend more time on both. According to the researchers, a Pew Research Center found that fathers were as likely as mothers to say that parenting was very important to their identity, but women may also face career penalties because of stereotypes that they're more family-oriented and less committed to their careers than men. About half of all the studies analyzed in the meta-analysis were conducted in the US, and the remainder was spread across countries in Europe and Asia. The researchers also looked at ratings of gender equality in the countries where the studies were conducted and were surprised to find that men and women reported similar levels of work-family conflict regardless of the gender equality levels of that country. However, not many of these work-family conflict studies have been conducted in the Middle East, where gender inequality is common and could lead to different findings. While some minor differences were found between men and women, and when the data were divided into subgroups, none of them were large. Mothers said they felt slightly greater family interference with work than fathers, as did women in couples where both partners were earners. By contrast, men in dual earning couples said they felt slightly higher levels of work interference with family, which women also reported when the subgroup was restricted to men and women in the same occupation. It's possible that men and women experience the same level of work-family conflict, but may perceive it differently. Women may feel guilty about work interference with family because of traditional expectations that mothers are child rearers. However, Dr. Shockley says there's been little research on this. Because a father's traditional role has been that of a primary breadwinner, men may feel like they're fulfilling their responsibilities, leading to less guilt. The researchers say that company and government policies should provide greater support for work-family policies that benefit women and men, such as flexible work arrangements, childcare support, and both paid maternity and paternity leave. Only 9% of workplaces in the US offer paid paternity leave, compared to 21% for maternity leave. The US, Suriname, and Papua New Guinea are the only countries that don't guarantee any paid maternity or paternity leave. And in the US, fathers take only 1 day of paternity leave on average, paid or unpaid, for every month of maternity leave mothers take. 96% of fathers take 2 weeks of leave or less for paternity leave. Increased paternity leave could improve mothers' well-being, and father-infant bonding has long-term positive benefits for children as well as an equal division of labor between spouses, Shockley said.
Yeah, no. The last part, no. The equal division of labor between the spouses has actually, when it was studied, it showed negative effects in the relationship between the spouses. It turns out that women lose respect for men if men do an equal amount of laundry or dishwashing and things like that. It's just, admittedly, it wasn't an extensive research, but the little research has been done. It doesn't point to that. As for the father-infant bonding, yeah, maybe, I don't know. I have to say I don't know.
I mean, she doesn't actually make any sort of explicit claim about an equal division of labor being good. It's just sort of implicitly assumed here.
Yeah, and that's why I said the assumption is likely wrong. Although it says here it has long-term positive benefits for children as well as an equal. Yeah, it's an implicit assumption. Yeah.
Yes,
Uh,
it says that paternity leave leads to more equal division of labor, which is just sort of
Not
tacitly
so.
good.
Yeah, but it's not true. Anyway, regardless of that, I loved it. I love that portion. It's possible that men and women experience the same level of work, but they may perceive it differently. It's pretty much the same thing with street violence, isn't it?
Yep.
Uh, where women perceive to be always under threat, even though in reality they're far less under threat than men are when it comes to street violence.
Yeah, and of course, in that case as well as in this case, it's that people generally have more empathy with women and they have more compassion for women,
Mhm.
and so they respond more to women complaining about their problems. Um, Whereas when men complain about these problems, they're perceived as weak and whiny, and it's something that is of fairly unattractive quality to women.
Mm.
Um, so men don't complain as much, and they don't show as much fear.
Yeah, and I'm going to be very politically incorrect for this crowd. I think complaining about work-family balance is weak and whiny, whether women do or men do it. I just think it's weak. It's life. Grow up. Stop whining. Seriously, I'm not joking. I'm not very high on empathy when it comes to these kinds of issues. Uh, I can understand asking for help. Look, how should I do this? Maybe you have more experience asking amongst your peers. Now I can understand that. But complaining that, oh my God, I can't find the perfect balance. Well, nobody can. It's called life. Grow up. Stop whining.
Yeah, I don't know.
I just can't. Sorry.
Sometimes whining can be sort of cathartic, and sort of complaining to other people, even if it doesn't change anything, may sort of change the way you feel about things, and it might make you feel better. Um, so I'm not necessarily against whining. It's just that you
I'm not.
shouldn't always just take it so seriously, because just because some person whines more doesn't mean that he or she is actually doing worse.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's just the imaginary is sick man. It's I mean, I've seen individuals who have both men and women who have a remarkably fantastic life, and they complain about the smallest things, the most. I mean, I perceive these kinds of people as being ungrateful bitches, and I have a very high. I have a lot of difficulty finding any sort of empathy with many of these cases. I just can't. I mean, I can. It's not a serious thing. If you're at the moment when you have to think about the minutiae of life, of balance between and maybe I could take some more time off. If you can afford all of that, then your life is fantastic. Stop complaining because
Yeah, pretty
most
much. Yeah.
people don't have that opportunity. Period.
Yep.
Because this is what I always hate with these kinds of studies, because they assume that everyone has careers when in reality most people don't have careers, they have jobs, which is slightly different thing.
Yep.
A career is something that you pursue with a higher goal in mind, and what a job is just something to pay the bills and maybe raise your children, and uh, your focus is not on the job. The job is just something that you do in order to do the rest of the things that you actually give a damn about.
Yep.
So, and this is what I always hate with these kinds of studies. They just assume that everyone has a career and everyone thinks about these stuff, and when in reality, that's just not the case. And in reality, most people, even in very rich countries, and especially in middle-income countries and poor countries, nobody thinks about these stuff. It's a concern for uh, maybe the top 10% of the people in rich countries. Maybe the top 10%. Although I think I'm being generous here with top 10%.
Yeah. Also, something that's worth pointing out is that with these meta-analyses, you get lots and lots of data, but it's often quite heterogeneous. So it's always the question of, we have lots of these different studies. Are they actually measuring the same thing? How comparable are these data? So if they say they find no significant differences, it doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't any. It's just not anything specific about this study, but just in general, something you have to keep in mind.
Especially when it measures stuff that are hard to measure. I mean, difficulty in finding work and home life balance. Well, what's that? It is culture specific, it is job specific, it is a lot of things specific. The more vague the notion you're trying to measure, the more likely you are to find, as you said, heterogeneous data. And when you make a meta-analysis, yeah, I don't know, maybe it's the same problem that there is with the other big meta-analysis and compilation of studies on domestic violence. When they measure explicit direct violence, now that's easy because everyone understands what that is. But once they go into things that I consider to be rather bullshit, such as financial violence or things like that, I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I think there is a significantly different understanding of what financial violence is in Saudi Arabia versus, I don't know, Hungary. Just saying. I mean, it's a lot harder to pull data from various places and then pretend that it measures the same thing.
Yeah, and when you then do something like you pull different data together from people who were like beat within an inch of their lives and people who were subject to financial violence, and you put all these numbers together, you get a number that doesn't tell you very much.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know how this particular meta-analysis was done, but it is fair to say that it might actually not measure the same thing. I mean, maybe the studies published in the last decade, let's say that there is a higher chance that they were measuring roughly the same thing, but those published decades ago, I don't know. Because decades ago, nobody was concerned with all of these things. So the few that were concerned might have had different notions than what quote unquote researchers have now.
Yeah, I mean, even the raw data is maybe not very reliable because it's about self-reporting, which is always problematic. I mean, even the researchers themselves say that, or it says in the article that men may feel more comfortable discussing those conflicts in anonymous confidential surveys, but then again, they may not.
Yeah.
And who knows?
Yeah. I'm willing to believe that particular portion because but then again, my cultural bias says no one complains about that. I mean, the only people that I've ever heard complaining about that are women in bullshit studies in academia. That's the only time I heard in real life someone complaining about that. Other than that, I only meet normal people, and normal people don't complain about this in public ever at all. They keep that thing between themselves and maybe their close friends, family, maybe a shrink, but that's pretty much it. I mean, why would you bring that in public? It's called displaying the laundry in public, dirty laundry, and no one wants to do that because it's not kosher.
Yep.
Because even today I was discussing this issue of putting your dirty laundry in public, and the conclusion of the conversation was something like, well, everyone has problems. What would happen if all of us would start complaining at once in public with all of our problems? It would be a catastrophe. It would be chaos.
Yep.
So yeah, but again, I am willing to give it a thought to the notion that there might not be entirely significant differences between men and women when it comes to their work-family quote-unquote conflict, because after all, women are people, and just like all the rest of the people, couldn't possibly be that different. And I think these researchers in social studies, that they tend to give an overwhelmingly high importance to these. Oh my God, the media portrayal and whatnot. Uh, Most people don't care about that, really. I mean, if you just look at how many people watch TV in Europe in the last 15 years, the total number has been significantly dropping constantly. So I don't know how much that plays any role these days. Also, they also provide this hope, but there is the stereotype, and I'm like, yeah, stereotypes are there for a reason. You know, it's not something inherently negative. I mean, most women are more family oriented, and that's fine.
Yeah, but I mean, at the end of the day, we shouldn't knock the seizures down too much, because there is definitely this perception that this sort of work-life balance stuff is more difficult for women, and there's this sort of double burden they have of having the household and work, and at least there's a sort of evidence against this common perception that it's all more difficult for women, because they didn't find any differences in these large number of studies.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, there's that, but this is a sort of question where it's very difficult to find some sort of scientific answer, because the whole thing is just so vague and prone to confirmation bias and biased responses from the survey participants and so on. It's very difficult to find a definitive answer, but at least it tells us that this sort of popular perception isn't really based on fact. It's more like a projection.
It is subjected to a high degree of subjectivism, I guess. And in my humble opinion, it's probably based on this, on the much older assumption, which probably was true 200 years ago, but is no longer true today. Namely that, being a stay-at-home parent is the hardest job in the world. Well, maybe that was true 200 years ago, because, just doing the laundry could take you 2 days. But in the current year, or in the last 30 years or so, it's probably not true. I mean, I said my brother is a stay-at-home dad for 2 girls. And he's like, can I do that for the next 15 years? That would be fantastic. It's much easier than my job. And most of the people that I know that are stay-at-home parents, but be it men or women, they all say after 6 months, they're like, I expect it to be a lot harder. It's actually remarkably easy.
Yeah, I don't think it's ever been the hardest job in the world. I mean, sure, 200 years ago it was a lot harder than it is now, but then also like regular paid work was also a lot harder 200 years ago. So I don't know. I'd still rather be a stay-at-home parent in the 19th century than a coal miner or something.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, at the very least, stay-at-home parents got to survive most of the time. Not so much with coal miners.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, shall we move on?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, coming from the Independent, also from the UK. Male rape, men forced into sex with threats, lies, and blackmail by women. Survey finds. A survey of men who say they have been forced to have sex by a woman claims blackmail and threats were the most common methods used. A research project of 154 men who said they were, quote, compelled to penetrate a woman found more than a fifth of them were forced into it by threats and blackmail. Telling lies, threats to end a relationship, warnings of rumor spreading, and verbal abuse were cited by 22% of men in the survey. The research project, led by Dr. Siobhan Were from Lancaster University Law School and supported by Charity Survivors Manchester, also found the use of force, such as pinning down with body weight or having a weapon, was reported by 14% of men who completed the survey. The project aimed to explore one of the last taboos, sexual violence by women against men. Dr. Very said, whilst the sample size of 154 may be smaller than typically expected, this must be considered in the context of an issue that is underreported and under-discussed, and that this is the first and only survey of its kind to be conducted in the UK. The hidden nature of this crime and the complex gender dynamics involved means that huge numbers of survey participants were highly unlikely not because this isn't happening to men, but because many are made to feel too ashamed or feel too distressed to report it. Dr. Weir said it was difficult to know the prevalence of forced to penetrate cases in the UK, but research in the US in 2010 found that approximately 1 in 21 men reported being, quote, made to penetrate someone else during their lifetime, with 79% of cases involving a female perpetrator. She added, the term forced to penetrate has been coined for these cases because, while they involve non-consensual penile penetration, they do not fall under the offense of rape. The offense of rape can only be committed by men due to the requirement of penile penetration of the victim. In forced to penetrate cases, the offender is the one being penetrated by a non-consenting victim. All 154 of the UK male survey participants had experienced compelled penetration. The men shared their most recent experience of being forced to penetrate a woman, as well as their engagement with the criminal justice system, how they would label what had happened to them, whether they had experienced multiple victimization, and emotional and psychological harms. The majority of the participants who completed the survey reported that they knew the woman, often as an acquaintance or a friend, and just over half were in or had been in a relationship with the perpetrator. Only 2 men said they had reported the experience to the police, and in both instances the case did not make it to court. Rape was the most frequent label used by the participants in describing their ordeal, despite the law not recognizing such cases in this way. Sex was used least frequently. The vast majority, 80% of them, did not disclose their experience to family or friends, and 74% had not sought support, suggesting that men are left feeling isolated and alone in dealing with their experiences. Duncan Craig, the founder and chief executive of Survivors Manchester, a charity supporting men who have experienced sexual violations, said, "This is really a groundbreaking piece of work by Dr. Weir. We have got to break the silence on this and let men know that we are here to listen and support them when needed." The research project was funded by a Lancaster University Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences Knowledge Exchange grant.
Right. Yeah, they already acknowledge beforehand it's a small sample size. What was it in the United States where they actually have a separate category in the National Crime Victimization Survey called exactly that, made to penetrate? I think it's in the United States, either the United States or
In
Canada.
the United States, I think it's called, what is it called? Forced envelopment, I think they call it.
Really? Okay. So made to penetrate is in Canada then.
I'm not. Maybe it is in the US too. I don't. I think they call it something with envelopment.
I see.
Yeah. Anyway, but the UK definition of rape, by that definition,
No, it's in the United States. It's in the CDC
okay.
National Crime Victimization Survey. I'm reading from Time magazine now. It's called "Men Reported Being Made to Penetrate at Virtually the Same Rates as Women Reported Rape." It's from Time magazine, September 17, 2014. So, you know, it's from that men's rights fascist far right website, time.com, for any feminists that might listen. Although I think we lost all the feminists listeners a while ago. Yeah, the reason I mentioned this is because this issue with made to penetrate could be much better discussed if it is in such a huge national survey rather than in small university project surveys. With that said, I presume the category in the CDC survey started with a small university project decades ago, so I guess there's always a first step.
Yeah, and I mean, this is not this survey is not about finding out how many victims there are. It's just more about asking these particular men who know are victims, how they've dealt with it, what were the reasons for this incident, and what's the relationship to their assailant, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in that regard, the findings are completely not surprising, I have to say. Especially this part, the majority of the participants knew the offender or an acquaintance or even had been in a relationship with the offender. A very few cases of stranger rape. This is pretty much the same thing that is found when such surveys are done to women who have been victims of rape too. Uh,
So classic scenario of someone jumping you in an alley or in a public park at night or something like that. That's I mean, that
Remarkable.
does
Yeah.
happen occasionally, but it's rare.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in that particular regard is virtually identical. What's not identical is the number of them who did not disclose to, not even to family and friends. I mean, women uh, are far more willing to disclose that, at least to family and friends. Uh, Maybe not seek support, but definitely disclose to family and friends. I mean, it's very rare when female victims don't do that. But with men, apparently 80%, that's a bit high. I have to admit, that's a bit high.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is that there's a huge stigma to that, even still, and
Yeah, there is.
it just sort of means that you're perceived as weak and unmanly, and people will sort of expect you to um, maybe even have enjoyed it, and if you don't, then that's sort of maybe something wrong with you, especially if it's like a reasonably attractive woman.
Mhm.
There's still a lot of these sort of cultural attitudes out there, and I'm not so sure if that's going to change anytime soon.
Yeah, and they're not going to change because, in addition to the what I like to call the religious left, you also have the much older instinct of gynocentrism, which predates all of this nonsense. Because on one hand, you have the again what I like to call the religious left, who are like, well, you can't really get an erection anyway if you're under duress, which is actually false. You can. It's remarkably common. But then you have all the, as you said, it's unmanly, or if you didn't do anything to her, to stop her, then that means you enjoyed it, because you could have stopped her physically and whatnot, which is sometimes true, sometimes not. I mean, yes, men on average are stronger physically than women, but that's not always the case. That doesn't mean every single woman uh, is weaker physically than every single man. I mean, it's just not the case in all cases, in all situations. There are a lot of individual variation there, and I suspect, especially with those, pinning down with the body weight and whatnot, I suspect that's some of those cases where the woman is above average strong. Let's put it that way, and the man is below average strong. So yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, there's ways of getting people to do something that they don't want to do,
Hmm.
apart from just brute physical strength. I mean, there are weapons. You can make various kinds of threats, and I mean, even if you have like a man who's maybe a bit stronger than a particular woman, um, it's not socially acceptable for him to use his strength to defend himself against a woman the same way he might against a man.
Yeah.
Because if he fights her off and gives her a bloody nose or something like that, then he's going to look like the bad guy.
Yeah, which is one of the reasons why I like my country, because at least that's not happening here. Then it happened recently with a female rapist, actually a serial rapist. They discovered it very recently that she was actually a serial rapist, because she finally decided to rape a cab driver accustomed to doing dangerous clients during the night. And let's just say that the cabbie wasn't really a white knight. Um, so she drugged him and tried to rape him, and he threatened him with a knife and even cut an open wound on his head. But nevertheless, he managed to get away, beat the crap out of her, locked himself in the bathroom, and called the police. Um, and at first she was not acquitted, but she was given a suspended sentence. And some of us, let's just say, we had a word about that in something called the petitions to the judiciary, to because we're not, it's a very similar process to what they have in UK. Actually, in the UK, it's even easier than here, in the sense that the citizens, if they gather enough signatures and a reasonably sound legal argument, they can actually ask a trial to be, at least a sentencing hearing to take place again in a higher court. It's something similar here too, but it's predicated on the Roman law rather than the common law, so it's a little bit more bureaucratic, but the idea is the same. And when they got again to the basically retrial because of the petitions and whatnot, the prosecutor came in with new evidence, and they found two other victims who had actually didn't say anything to anyone because they couldn't fight her. So at the very least here, the cabbie didn't look like the bad guy. I mean, everyone was like, "Oh, come on!" She even cut a wound with her knife in his head. I mean, why didn't he just kill her? I mean, he left her alive to call the police. That, yeah, maybe he should have killed her. I mean, can we kill her? So in that regard, at least, that's why I like my country. I mean, nobody saw him as a bad guy. Everyone was like, "Oh my god, that's horrible." And yeah, she was reasonably attractive, but boy, she was crazy. And apparently, now the lawyer her lawyer is trying to come to claim that she's crazy, which she might get away with if she says she's crazy, but she's gonna have to stay in a psychiatric facility. And even I believe she's crazy. I mean, I've seen an interview with her, and I'm like, that's not a normal human being. It's just not. But yeah, but in general, you're right. If a male victim of rape, especially if the rapist is a woman, in some jurisdictions, not so much in Europe, but definitely in the United States, he's the guilty party no matter what. If he defends himself, he's guilty. If he doesn't, he's still guilty or unmanly, or definitely no one cares about his experience. It's just horrible. But I think some of these things can change because most of them are flaws in legislation a lot more than cultural attitudes. Because at the end of the day, cultural attitudes you can sometimes ignore, but when you have the weight of the law in favor of the perpetrator, now that's a little bit harder to ignore.
Yep.
Okay, let's go to the next one. It's interesting, but I'd like to see a survey done with a much higher sample size, because again, I'm not convinced. It just seems unreasonably high that 80% of the victims did not disclose the experience, not even to family and friends. I mean, I can believe the other one, 74, did not seek support. Okay, I can believe that one, but not even disclosing to family or friends, that just sounds unreasonably high to me. But I can definitely at least attempt to believe it if I'm to think that especially in the former Western Bloc, men just don't have a support network anymore for some reason. I mean, especially after marriage, men tend to lose their support network that they may have had during their youth and early 20s. Slowly, in later of the life, they tend to lose that support network for some reason. It's not my experience, but I hear that it is the experience of many men.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to the next one. The next one is, yeah, also coming from, I forgot to archive the link, but anyway, from the Independent. Tesco to cut prices on 100 women's sanitary products and paid the tampon tax itself. Tesco will cut the price of almost 100 women's sanitary products by 5% and cover the cost of the tampon tax itself, the supermarket has announced. The retailer will pay the controversial charge that applies to sanitary products after saying that the cost of buying the products was a real struggle for many of its customers. Campaigners have long called for the charge on sanitary products to be scrapped, arguing that they are essential items and should therefore be exempt from the tax. The government has reduced the tax to 5%, but said that the European Union rules stop it from lowering any further or scrapping the tax entirely. Last year, David Cameron persuaded European ministers to change the rules to allow VAT to be removed from sanitary products, but the change cannot come into effect until at least 2018. The move followed an online petition that attracted 320,088 signatures. Until the levy is removed, ministers have committed to donating the proceeds of the tax to women's charities. Tesco said the 5% reduction will apply to both its own label products and better-known brands. The supermarket had already committed to passing on the saving to customers if, as expected, VAT is scrapped on sanitary products in 2018. However, it has now said it will cut the prices of the product immediately. Michelle McKettrick, Tesco's group brand director, said, quote, "For many of our customers, tampons, panty liners, and sanitary towels are essential products. However, the cost of buying them from every month can add up, and for many women and girls, it can be a real struggle on top of other essential items. That's why, as a little help for our customers, we are reducing the cost of these products by 5%. Campaigners welcomed the move and called to other supermarkets to adopt a similar policy. Labour MP Paula Sherriff, who has led the campaign against the tampon tax in the parliament, said, quote, "It would have been completely unacceptable if abolishing the tampon tax had just led to big businesses boosting their bottom line at the expense of women buying what are essential goods, which is why we pushed the supermarket to sign up to a deal to pass the cut on. But this goes a step further by reducing prices right now, and I hope other big retailers now consider doing the same. The government and the EU should make clear their timetable for scraping VAT on sanitary products entirely," she added. Yeah, no. I think toilet paper is a lot more of a sanitary product and a much very needed product rather than some pink razors and whatnot, because this is where, or some very fancy towels. Give me a break. I don't know if it's a good move by Tesco or not, but at the end of the day, it's their money, so why should I care?
Yeah, it's basically a PR stunt by them.
Yeah. I'm not convinced that it will necessarily be a good stunt, or they will actually bring them more sales and whatnot and make up the loss through, I don't know, a higher volume of sales and whatnot, because this is how these chain stores actually think. I mean, yeah, sure, they cut this one by 5%, but you can be sure that that particular cut will find itself in another product being made more expensive or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, these kinds of stores, they tend to have very small profit margins, so they can't just like cut prices by 5% or whatever, however much, and just pocket the loss, because probably the profit margin is less than 5% even.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's usually less than 2 in the very large ones.
Particular product, but yeah, it's usually very small. Probably they're hoping that with this, there's going to be more women coming in who would then buy various other products, and with that, it's basically a sort of a loss leader, which can work out. Whether it's actually going to work in this particular case, I have no idea. I don't know any of the numbers, but yeah, that's why they're doing it. And as far as the wider issue of whether these sanitary products should be taxed, I mean, I'm personally always basically in favor of reducing taxes.
Yeah.
But I don't really see any compelling reason why these kinds of products have to be singled out. There's lots of products that are very important. I don't know, food is more essential than sanitary pads or whatever. I don't know about whether the UK has a VAT on food, but I assume they do.
They do, yeah, they do.
So, I mean...
Or at least in July 2016 they had, so... But also with this, the EU rules don't allow us... I don't know. In my country, we scrapped VAT entirely on food 2 years ago, and no one complained. So why couldn't Britain? Yes, there is a floor, basically, a floor, a cellar on how low you can go with the VAT. But then there's also the loophole on you can select certain products to be exempt from VAT entirely, and you can put food there or sanitary products or whatever. And the longest list is on Ireland. They have like 21 types of products that are VAT exempt. So yeah, this can be done. I mean, that particular thing, the EU won't let us. Yeah, sorry, no, the EU is cancer, but not in this regard.
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain sort of pressure from the EU to sort of harmonize the tax rates and so on. But if other countries like Romania or Ireland can put in these exceptions, then certainly the UK can too.
Yeah, absolutely. No, but there is entirely in the EU legislation the exemption for member states to include that. I think it's up to 15 products you can include there, or categories of products, I should say. And Ireland gets away with a lot more than that because they had a huge list of like 150 products before this particular legislation came into force, and they just went into the EU Parliament as like, you can't just put us to reduce everything to 15. We'll always have more than that. and everyone's like, yeah, okay, whatever. Ireland is going to be a one-off, but nevertheless, the UK has only one product. I think it's a VAT exempt. It's universities, and I think one or two categories. So they could have definitely scrapped it immediately, within a matter of weeks if they really wanted to, but they didn't. As for this, the discourse of this lady, the Paula sheriff, oh my God, the tax just led to big business boosting their bottom line at the expense of women. Bitch, give me a break, please, please give me a break. The Tesco and all of these, they're not charities. I mean, they're there to help you as long as they make a buck out of it. Uh, that's how capitalism works. If I don't win anything, then it's not a then that's exploitation. Actually, I mean, if the retailers don't make anything, then it's exploitation. Everyone has to win.
Yeah, and I mean it's not like these companies just offer low prices because they're really nice people and they like their customers or something.
No.
They offer the prices are as low as they are because of competition, and they're as high as they are because the companies can get away with it because of lack of competition, because there's no one else offering the product at a lower price. And this sort of a narrative that when there's a tax reduced, that the companies can just like pocket the difference and just be magically more profitable. That's not true. I mean, some of the basically the various economic factors going to play into how much of how much the prices are going to go down, and it's nothing to do with whether the businesses are greedy or not. They're going to charge the prices that they think will maximize their profit, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, yeah, and besides, the demand for any product has a different degree of I don't know the term in English, elasticity. I guess.
Yep, that's the word.
Because again, I'll give the example for Romania. When VAT for food was 24% and it was taken down to zero, some food products actually got cheaper with like 35%, others with exactly 24% the VAT rate, and others remained the same. I mean, the market readjusted on other aspects too. It's not just a clear cut, oh, we're going to abolish this tax and suddenly everything will go down by exactly that amount of the tax. Well, yeah, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, sometimes they go lower than that, or sometimes they even get more expensive.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people believe that the way businesses work is that they just look at their costs and then they say that this product costs us $10 to make, so we're going to charge a little bit more than $10, so we're going to have like a markup of, I don't know, 3%, 5% or something, and that's then that product costs $10.50 or something. That's not how it works.
No,
it's not
absolutely.
They charge basically whatever prices they can get away with. When what they can get away with is determined by the demand from customers and the supply from their competitors.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the way economics works. It's not based on businessmen being nice or being greedy.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, people who think like that probably don't understand. This is easier to see when you're building networks, which is actually what I do for a living. It's my business. Sometimes I make something innovative internal in my company, and the cost of doing that can be a few cents or $1, but if it is really fantastic, I mean, sometimes customers, even before I even thought about the price, customers are like, we'll pay $1,000 to have that in our company too. So, and then I start pricing from there. I'm like, well, that means I can get away with that. And then see what the competition has to offer. And as long as the competition doesn't have anything to offer that's is similar to what I just innovated inside my company, then I'm going to charge something around that. It doesn't matter how much it cost me to do it.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes businesses will even have to sell things at
At a loss.
At a loss, yeah, because someone selling a quote unquote at a loss means avoiding a greater loss by not selling it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. or maybe you recoup that cost, that particular quote-unquote loss, from another service that you render to the client, or things like that. They're different business models, and in these particularly big chain stores, the business model is on volume, is not necessarily on product. So if they lower the price so high with 5%, that's quite a lot for a huge chain store. But if they do that, then probably they'll add a penny to other products or something like that to recoup the costs. I mean, it's not going to be just charity. It doesn't work like that.
Yep.
Right. Let's go. Oh, the next one is from the silly place. Go ahead.
Coming from the Standard, also from the UK, gender pay gap in modeling industry sees women earn 75% more than men. While the BBC may be in hot water for the gender disparity highlighted in its recent salary report, there's been little said about the state of pay within the fashion industry. A new study, however, has shed some light on the situation, and women come out on top. Reportedly earning around 75% more than their male counterparts, women make up 9 out of the top 10 highest earning models in British fashion. Losing a place in the top spot is Kate Moss, who has been overtaken financially by friend and model, 19 years her junior, Cara Delevingne. Earning 8 million a year, Delevingne has the power of Instagram to thank for her 22 £1,000 a day salary, according to new research conducted by lingerie brand Blue Bella, based on a catwalk, day rates, and commercial deals. With over 40 million Instagram followers, compared to Moss's agency accounts 631,000, the 24-year-old model turned actress dominates a more influential arena on social media, rendering her more attractive to advertisers. Landing the second spot was new mother Rosie Huntington Whitley, who reportedly earned 6.5 million last year, with thanks in part to her 7.6 million Instagram followers. According to the research, Moss took third spot and earns around 5 million. Fourth place went to the first and only male model on the list. David Gandy reportedly makes £4 million, while fifth place went to 47-year-old Naomi Campbell, who earns around £3 million annually. Sixth place went to Georgia May Jagger, reportedly on 2.5 million, while Ellie Campbell came in seventh on £2 million. Jordan Dunn came 8th place, reportedly on 1.75 million, ahead of Erin O'Connor's £1.5 million. Taking 10th spot on the list is Kate Moss's younger half-sister Lottie. Signed to Storm Models, the same agency that discovered Kate, the 19-year-old is reportedly already on a salary of £1 million. So the only thing that surprises me is that the gap is so small.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the fact that there is one man in the top 10, I don't think that's really common. I mean, if I look at the top 10 models in France or in Brazil, I don't think there's any man there. I mean, maybe you can find one in the top 30, but in top 10, not really. So it's remarkably small. Also, it is a bit disgusting. I mean, come on, Naomi Campbell, that was like a thing 25 years ago, really. Again, the Brits don't have, they're so very poor taste. I mean, come on, Naomi Campbell, you gotta be fucking kidding me. I mean, the granny should, be busy raising her nephews or something, grandchildren, sorry. Just saying. Anyway, joke aside, yeah, the gap is remarkably small. I mean, just 75%. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, if you'd ask me, I would say, the difference is like a factor of 5 or something, but apparently it's just not that different.
Mm-hmm. No, I would have expected more, maybe not a factor of 5, but I would have expected something like the difference between men and women in the, what's it called, BDSM porn or something like that, which is usually it's something like 95% or 100%, which is 2 times more, basically a factor of 2. That's what I would have expected. A factor of 5, that's a bit high even by French standards. In France, it's something like that, a factor of 2.5. But I don't remember seeing because I looked it up a little bit before the show, and it's a little bit higher. And I'm not surprised. I mean, I have to admit, I'm not surprised. modeling is just a business in which women do better because there are a lot more people, even both men and women, who would like to see beautiful women in various commercials and whatnot, and that's fine. I mean, why is that a problem?
Yeah, and I mean they're doing quote unquote the same job, but
Yeah.
just because you have the same job description and you do sort of similar things on the job does not mean that your work is equally valuable.
hmm Yeah, and modeling is a very good analogy to what the British brainwash corporation presenters do, or as I gave the analogy with football last show when we spoke about the BBC saga. These people are basically monopolists. I mean, you don't get you don't get another Rosie Huntington Whiteley or another Georgia May Jagger. You just don't. These people are monopolists. There's only one of them. And the same goes with BBC presenters. The same goes with football players. I mean, recently Neymar Jr. was signed for like 300 million pounds to play for Paris Saint-Germain. That sounds a lot, but then again, you don't get another Neymar. It's pretty much the same thing. Kudos to the Evening Standard for finding this particular analogy, because it's very good for the controversy that the BBC has. I mean, they have a top talent with people who are essentially monopolists. There's only one of them, and yeah, the monopolists of the male sex happen to make more because there are more people who want to see them on TV and whatnot. Same here. These people are monopolists, models, whatever, and the monopolists of the female sex happen to make more because there are more people who would like to see them on commercials or on the magazine covers or whatever models do.
Yeah, and this whole entertainment industry is really the perfect way of seeing that just because two people are doing quote unquote the same work, it still has vastly different value. Like if you say producing a TV commercial, whether you have in one ad say some sort of famous actor saying a particular line, or another ad saying some ordinary person who no one knows about saying the same line and doing an equally good job at the voice acting, still the famous actor is going to get paid a lot more because just because he's a famous actor or she's a famous actress, the commercial is going to be more successful. It's going to probably attract more people towards the product just because of who that particular person is.
Mhm.
And the same thing on a sort of much smaller scale can also happen for like ordinary employees. Maybe you just, as an employee, you just like a particular employee better. That doesn't need to be because of sexism or racism or classism or whatever sort of ism you want to think about. It may just be like some sort of personal preference because this is like a nice person or is very pleasant to be around or something like that. And I think that's perfectly legitimate. I don't see how that's some sort of how that's somehow unjust to any of the employees that someone is being paid more just for being pleasant to be around or being well spoken or whatever.
Yeah, and again, this whole thing is predicated on this remarkably pernicious and generally disdainful narrative of fairness. I mean, yes, it's not fair that I don't know, Naomi Campbell earns £3 million annually. Although I can think of out of the top of my head of 100 women that I've seen on the street today that are more attractive than Naomi Campbell. Of course, it's not fair, but life is not fair, and that's fine. It doesn't have to be fair. I think we will all be in a better place if we just got rid of the whole fairness thingy, especially when it comes to employment and things like that. No, yes, it's not fair. So fucking what? Deal with it. I don't know. I've lived that in my own experience. When I was much younger, I went to work for a telesales, call center and whatnot. I would call people to sell them stuff. I don't even remember what the fuck I was selling, but it doesn't matter. And there was a union trying to gain new members, and they convinced the crappiest sellers in the call center to unionize and try to militate for a more fixed salary, because at the time the actual salary was like crap, and everything else would be from commissions of the things that you would sell, fees that you would charge. And at the end of the month, actually, most of us were paid a lot more than the median salary of the country. But indeed, the crappiest sellers would be paid even lower than the minimum wage, and that was okay. But they said, oh, it's not fair. And some of them were complaining that, oh my god, that guy or that guy makes a lot more and whatnot. And some of us, including myself, would get some extra bonuses just to stay in that call center, because we were like, yeah, we don't like the work conditions, we might leave. And the boss was like, well, that guy was a top seller at the former competitor, so maybe I should keep him, because if he leaves, he's going to work for the competition, and that's a lot worse. And they were like, oh, it's not fair that that guy gets, including myself, that he gets a special bonus just because he was a top seller at the previous company. And the boss was like, yeah, but he's also a top seller here, and if we lose him, everyone is worse off. And yeah, it's not fair, but then again, so what? And again, this whole notion of fairness, I don't know how to defeat it, but it has to be defeated.
Yeah, I think it's what I said last time. There's sort of this infantile attitude that it's sort of like you're treating it like your employer is your parent, is giving you an allowance, and if the other employees get a bigger allowance, and it's not fair.
Yeah, it is. It just seems like a fantastic analogy, and maybe it's me resisting trying to think that most people are children, but I guess most people are children, especially the people who are militant for quote unquote fairness. Because yeah, I mean, it wasn't an allowance; it was more like of a bonus. I worked for that shekel. And that's fine. And you can say that, oh, well, how much work does Rosie Huntington Whiteley does, or Naomi Campbell? Well, it's work enough that enough people are willing to pay them millions each year. And that's fine. Even if it is not fair, so what?
Yeah, I mean, you can sort of, if you want to complain about anything, you can complain about people who buy products associated with Naomi Campbell or whatever.
Absolutely.
You can say that these people have poor taste or whatever, but ultimately people like what they like, and it's very difficult to change that. And lashing out for that at society or capitalism or the modeling for firms in the advertisers is just unreasonable.
Yeah, it is. And at the end of the day, nobody said capitalism is going to bring you your favorite result. It's just going to give you the result that most people actually want and are willing to pay for it, and that's it. I mean, if a significant amount of people want to buy, I don't know, products advertised by Rosie Huntington Whiteley, then that is what it is. Capitalism just makes it easier and more profitable for everyone. It doesn't say that you necessarily love it.
Yeah, basically, capitalism allows people to fulfill their desires, their wants.
Yeah,
and
whatever those desires may be.
Maybe some people have bad preferences. You can argue that, but at the end of the day, it still seems a lot better to have a system that actually, works on pleasing people than one that works on dictating people to people what they have to be pleased with.
Clearly, yeah. Yeah. In the end, just like with the BBC, I don't think it's a problem. These people are monopolists, and it's okay that they're monopolists. And they're attractive enough for their employers, and there's nothing wrong with that. I guess with the BBC, it's because it's a state-paid, state-funded corporation. But even there, they still have to work within a market system, and it is what it is. And complaining about it, I don't think is going to solve it. I mean, I'm willing to bet. I don't know if someone will take the bet. Let's bet €10 that nothing of substance will change at the BBC even next year or 2 years from now or 3 years from now. I mean, that guy said that he's going to solve everything in 3 years by 2020. Yeah, no, you won't. The only way to solve that would be to fire all the top male talent, not to shrink their salaries, fire them all, and not employ anyone in their place, or employ only below mediocre people. And overall, the audience and influence and the prestige of the BBC would shrink, which I think that would be fantastic in and of itself for other reasons. And yeah, then you'll have some equality, but then you'll have much crappier quality. That's, of course, implying that BBC has any quality now, but anyway.
Yeah, I'm not going to take that bet, sorry.
I'm going to try with feminists. Maybe some of them will be willing to bet. I'll have them sign the contract in blood. Okay, let's go to the next one.
Okay, speaking of feminists, coming from Edition F, which is sort of a feminist website. How the political system downplays domestic violence. Quote, just because he beats the mother doesn't mean he's a bad father. And it's a very long article, so I've cut liberally from it. Politicians tend to discover their love of families during election season. The SPD wants to promote compatibility between work and family. The Minister for Families is an important player in this. It is led by Katarina Barley, who has recently become controversial in her own party and who has taken over the office from Manuela Schwesig. After just a few weeks in office, something remarkable has happened. Ms. Barley met with representatives of separated parents, including with fathers' organizations, such as the Interessengemeinschaft Jungen Männer und Väter, the Väteraufbruch für Kinder, and the Väternetzwerk. Support for men from the ministry is nothing new. Back when the CDU's Christina Schröder was Minister for Families, she focused on rather questionable issues, such as when she publicly wondered whether there were enough dictation exercises on the topic of football in German classrooms. Because according to her, that's what boys are interested in, and the chances of academic success would be destroyed if the only topics were butterflies and ponies. Ms. Barley's event was considerably less charming than Ms. Schröder's primary school pupils. Among the attendees were fathers' rights organizations, in whose Facebook groups mothers are not exactly showered with love. They are often called, quote, whores and birthing machines. Refugees and homosexuals can look forward to similar terms of endearment. Skipping a whole bit here. Since the 2009 reform of family law, parents have had to be at family court within a month of their application for custody or visitation rights. At that hearing, the judges are supposed to reach a preliminary decision. Now, a father's visitation rights are rarely influenced by whether he has committed any criminal acts against the mother. Additionally, over the last few years, family courts have stopped questioning the parenting abilities of fathers who have been proven to be violent. People involved in such cases often have the attitude that, quote unquote, just because the father beats the mother does not mean he's a bad parent. This is the reported literal quotation of what a socio-pedagogical worker of the Berliner Krisennotdienststelle told a mother in search of help. And this Krisennotdienststelle is some sort of like place where you can go to if you have some sort of psychological problems, you don't know how to cope with life anymore, or something like that. And they also provide a link which is supposed to back up this sort of story. But the link is like a completely different thing. That's it's like basically further up in the article they have a link to some sort of law, and they've just like copied the same link here, which doesn't fit at all. So I don't know what to make of that.
Either bad editing or no argument.
Yeah, presumably have some sort of a link that's supposed to back up that statement, but it's not there. Okay, continuing with the article. This way of thinking is dangerous since growing up in an environment filled with violence is detrimental to children's development. For the overwhelming majority of victims, there will be further violent incidents after the separation, often during visitation or while passing off the child. The recent case of a 29-year-old mother of 3 from Thuringia is a good example. The woman had to be hospitalized for 2 days because of her husband's domestic violence. The authorities nevertheless left the children, aged 1 to 4, with the father. When the mother came back, he had killed 2 of his children and inflicted injuries upon himself. Quote, there was domestic violence against the wife, but as of Tuesday, there was no indication of danger to the children, a Bild newspaper cites the senior prosecutor. After all, up to that point, the man's violence had never been directed towards his children. Skipping another couple of paragraphs here. What is remarkable is that the recently founded Liberale Männer in the FDP, so the liberal men in the FDP, even demanded that it should be possible for men to reject paternity. A man who rejects the child signs a declaration and then has no financial obligation to the child. The government will then be on the hook. With the FDP demand of shared custody as the mandatory standard after divorce, paradisical conditions for fathers are on the horizon. While mothers will tend to be caught in the grind of the office, parent-teacher conferences, and dirty laundry, men will be able to choose, based on their current circumstances, how much interaction with their children would suit them. And that's what I'm going to read from this article.
Wah, wah, wah. That's all I heard. Wah. Yeah. I'm surprised that this is coming from the SVP, SPD. Sorry. Yeah, that's a bit surprising. Other than that, why is she complaining? And I don't know how politically correct it is to say this, but I actually do agree. I mean, that particular case from Thuringia, if I heard correctly, that she's citing, that's rather a bizarre exception. And from my understanding, I mean, that guy then hurt himself, so he might not have been in full mental faculties, as we say here. But nevertheless, that's a remarkably rare case. In most cases, and again, I worked for a while with troubled families, and in cases where domestic violence was involved among the spouses, in most cases was reciprocal. It was actually true in many cases that they would hate each other, but they would never hit the kids. And I actually do agree with that particular standard. Just because you guys hate each other, but nevertheless the kid has no fault in that, and why should a parent be excluded from that? If you're afraid that they might fight physically with each other again when they pass the kid from one to another, fine, then put some supervision on that and charge the parents for it. But I don't see that as a reason to exclude one parent from the relationship with his or her kid just because they fought against each other. I actually do agree with that standard, as horrifying as it may sound. Coming from practice, again, I worked with troubled families 15 years ago, and in very poor areas in the far east of Romania and Republic of Moldova, where domestic violence is, believe me, is not that often as people think, but when it happens, it's harsh. It's really harsh. And it was actually the case that once the parents would get separate, they were no longer having the opportunity to fight with each other, but the kids were not necessarily worse off. They were worse off because they would have to walk from one parent to another, or be transported and whatnot. But no, if the kids had not been hit prior to that, everyone would agree that they should still be able to see both of their parents. And in cases where there was an extreme concern, okay, some supervision, fine, but why should children be excluded from one of their parents if that parent had never been violent with that kid? I don't see any reason for that.
Yeah, I mean, probably there's some sort of factor of like general tendency towards violence, and that someone who's violent against their partner is also more likely to be violent towards the children. That's probably true.
In practice, I've never seen that. In cases where the kids had never been hit, but the parents had fought physically with each other, or only one parent was hitting the other, that pattern remained after separation too, in the sense that they would still hate each other or whatnot, but the kids were fine after separation. That's my experience talking. Maybe it's not general, but still, I would rather trust the judge who said that, or the social worker or whatnot. That sounds like someone who's been on the field just like I was, and is like, yeah, I'm sure he hates the mother of the kid, but he doesn't hate the kid.
Yeah, I mean, sort of the fact that he's never hit the children before is sort of evidence for that. So yeah, that does seem reasonable to me. As for the sort of larger story, is basically we currently have a system right now that's like extremely favorable towards women, and now some political parties dare to as much as talk to some people who would like to change that, and then suddenly it's that's basically the end of the world, and they're all misogynists, and
Yeah,
they're
that's why I
basically
said
sort of
wah.
complaining at a very high level. It's a very much sort of first world problems.
Wah.
Um,
Sorry.
yeah,
Wah. I mean, that's the only way I can summarize this. Wah. Oh my God, they spoke with some father rights activists. Wah. How dare they? Wah. So what? It's not like they promised to those people that they'll make all the changes that they demanded. They just spoke with them.
yeah.
Shouldn't that
Also,
be shouldn't that be part of the normal political dialogue that takes place in any democracy? I mean, what's so wrong about that?
yeah. I also find it funny how salty they still are about Christina Schröder, who was Minister for Families from 2009 to 2013, and
What
she
did
was
she
like,
do that then?
she just basically was a conservative and not a feminist.
Ah, I see.
Um,
So thought crime. Okay.
yeah, it's not like she was an MRA or anything like that, but she was like, I guess, like
Not insane.
a reasonable person who, thought that maybe her ministry should also be at least somewhat concerned about men and boys in particular. Because I mean, it is the ministry for what is it?
Ministry against men.
Families, women, youth, seniors, so basically everyone except men. Um, but I mean, at least in terms of families, men are still part of families, and you know, boys are part of youth, so they definitely fall within the purview of that ministry. But sort of even having some sort of slight approach towards balance, that was already enough for them to basically condemn her.
Mhm.
It's also like the fact that she actually dared to take her husband's surname. That's also like a black mark against her.
I see. That's a horrible crime. Yeah,
Yeah.
we can't, nobody can have that. Yeah, but still, I mean, for what my going beyond the wow, which is what I'm tempting to say every time I speak about this article, but going beyond that particular onomatopoeic appreciation, um, what seems to concern her the most, or him, whatever, the author of this article, what seems to concern the author a lot is is this whole thing that oh my God, the family court isn't going to inquire about the crimes committed by the father against the mother. I presume that the other way around is also true. The family court doesn't inquire the crimes committed by the mother against the father. And also, as far as I'm concerned, correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't these family court trials sometimes taking place long before any criminal investigation was ended? So in many cases, the judges don't even know if any crimes have actually been committed in the eyes of the law anyway.
Yeah, that's
So what she's basically saying, oh, the family court should be biased essentially and believe any allegations without having any of them actually proven in a court of law, just because potato. That's basically the contention of the author.
yeah, basically.
Yeah, fuck her. Bring the helicopters. Amazing. Yeah, it's funny. It's funny. The way she complains is just funny. Or he. If it's a he, then
She.
okay. Yeah, but still, that complaining, amazing. And I see that towards the end of it, she also complains about um, third wave feminism and the gender pay gap, and I presume that there's all the buzzwords, the right buzzwords are in there, right?
Yeah, basically.
Last two paragraphs. You didn't translate them, but I'm progressing with my German, so I'm starting to get them quite in the, you know, just as I read it. Yeah, but still, generally, I don't buy. I don't think maybe FDP. The FDP last time that they were in the government, they were at least trying to put a break on the progressive insanity. So maybe they'll do the same now. I don't know. Last time we spoke about them, you said that they had a lot of feminists infiltrated in the recent years.
Yeah, I mean, there's some feminists there, but I mean, as far as they're at least a lot less feminist than any of the parties that are currently in the Bundestag.
Fair enough.
Although that's not a particularly high standard.
I was about to say that.
And I mean, they are as a sort of ideologically opposed to this idea of women's quotas and so on. So that's good. But what really surprised me is that you have this sort of reaching out from an SPD minister, and actually trying to talk to some sort of men's rights, or like not men's rights, but fathers' rights organization. So that's
a first for sure.
Yeah, that's definitely a good sign. Whether they're going to take any of their demands, I don't know. But at least that they're talking to them is at least something that a couple of years ago I would never have expected for the SPD to do.
Yeah, and it will also leave a door open, because here's the thing with practical politics. First, you get a foot in the door. Then comes the rest of it. So, maybe the SPD won't put anything in their election manifesto from what they've heard from these fathers' rights people. But still, many of these fathers' rights people would have now had a foot in the door. They could enter into the halls of power, because SPD is going to be in a coalition in the next government. That's for sure.
It's not for sure, no.
Really?
No. There's still definitely a chance of, say, a CDU and FDP coalition, for example, or some sort of coalition with the CDU, FDP, and the Greens, maybe, or something like that. It's definitely possible.
Okay, fair enough. But still, there's a high chance that the coalition will look pretty much similar to what it looks like now. But even so, they would have at least a foot in the door in a big political party, which is definitely a significant amount of progress from 10 years ago, when no mainstream, especially not the big political parties, would even give them the time of the day.
Yep. And even though these are the kinds of people that have people on their Facebook groups who call women whores and birthing machines. I just find that really funny. And it links to another article where it talks about some sort of fathers' rights organization has on their Facebook page someone who has posted that sort of thing. It's quite funny. It's like if I wanted to dismiss feminism, I just go to like some feminist group on Facebook and find some sort of disparaging comment about men, and then therefore I conclude that all of feminism is cancer based on that one statement.
Well, actually, it wouldn't be that hard. I mean, there's a lot more, a lot more per square inch of those in feminist groups than the other way around. And besides, some women are whores, and calling a whore is called describing reality. Now, yeah, sometimes reality is offensive. So what? And I'm sorry, but calling women who can't support themselves but have 12 kids, well, that's a birthing machine, mate, and that's fine. I mean, what's so wrong about describing reality? I mean, I can understand when the quote-unquote insults don't fit reality. Then I can say, "Oh, you're an ass for doing that." But when it actually describes reality, I'm fine with hard words. I mean, what's so wrong with calling a whore a whore? Seriously, what's the problem?
Yeah, I mean, I would presume that the people are talking about are not literally whores.
Ah, okay.
Almost certainly used as an insult here.
Well, then we can actually say about the author of this article, she's an ideological whore. because you can only be an ideological whore. I mean, well, okay, not this article, but I've seen some articles written by feminists, especially on everyday feminism, and I'm like, this person is either suffering from a collection of mental disorders or is just an ideological whore. The shekels she or he gets paid to write this stuff is just so good that he'll write it anyway, regardless of reality. Because some things that feminists write, you're like, no way a normal person would believe that without a paycheck. There's just no way. Either it's mental disorder or a very good paycheck. It's just that simple. Right. Let's go to the silly place. The silly place. Well, actually, no, not the silly place because it's good news. Coming from Veckans Affärer from Sweden, the CEO of scandal-ridden dollar store. With these record numbers, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the SVT and ETC for their fine cooperation. Now, SVT is Sveriges Television, the national taxpayer-funded television in Sweden, and ETC is a very, very far-left, commie, Soros-funded and taxpayer-funded magazine. Okay. So, Dollar Store founder Peter Alberg wrote a newsletter to his employees just before Easter that exploded in the media. Initially, the letter appeared to contain just plain corporate information with a message about the newcomers and new managers. But in the final paragraph, the letter suddenly changed its tune, and Peter Alberg went to the frontal attack against feminism and gender equality, reported ETC. Quote, in protest, I totally stand against all the beauty that has been written about gender equality and feminism. There is no substance to that hate-filled set of ideas, close quote. Peter Alberg finished the newsletter saying he would like to be called a misogynist pig and that hen is the worst pronoun he knows, and then wishing his employees a nice weekend. But the media storm that followed did not seem to have affected the dollar store figures. In an email to Veckans Affärer, Peter Alberg, I guess, presents the sales figures for July 2017 and the first half of 2017. Quote, sales excluding VAT in July amounted to 179 million svenska kronor, an increase of 30% compared with the same period last year. Operational profit amounted to 18,200,000 svenska kronor, an increase of 78%. Continued growth during the period of January the 1st to July the 31st, an increase of 29% compared to the same period of 2016. With these record numbers, I would like to thank SVT and ETC for their good cooperation and hope for new publications to offer both their name and image to the growth of my business. You have a big deal in our fine July figures. Thank you, writes Peter Alberg in the message, and then continues, gratefulness is so great, so with joy I think today I'll sign a sponsor check for 10,000 kronor for each publication for your continued expansion. Even though your business is largely financed by Swedish taxpayers, I find joy in my generous approach. Cakes are also on the way, and these are also gender certified and safe for non-binaries, close quote. Peter Alberg often goes his own way. In addition to a conviction in a felony trial where he escaped prison because he had been a first-time offender, he has also offered people who have been caught shoplifting a stamp and a sign to walk around which reads, I'm a thief, I stole from a dollar store. If they accepted, dollar store would abstain from pressing charges with the police, but only after the thieves paid dollar store's administration fee of 1,500 svenska kronor. Human rights lawyers argue, however, that the method is illegal. Have yet to prove that. In addition to all the controversies, he has received more prizes for his entrepreneurship, including the Founder of the Year at the Entrepreneurial Gala in Umeå, organized by the Founders Alliance in 2012. Under the same gala, Dollar Store was also named the Entrepreneur of the Year. Dollar Store's concept is the easiest way to sell goods such as soap, detergent, and home furnishings at low prices. The first Dollar Store opened outside Örnsköldsvik in 1999, and today the chain has 53 stores. In 2016, it sold more than 1 billion svenska krona. That's 100 million euros. So... I'll give you cakes that are gender certified. Well done. Well done. Absolutely well done. And it's even more fantastic the fact that this is in Sweden. I mean, the place where you would lose your job or business just 3 years ago for much more minor disagreement. I mean, this guy just called them cancer and hate-filled, and he said, yeah, I'm fine to being a misogynist pig. Oh, and by the way, hen is cancer too. And then the largest media corporation in Sweden, which is SVT, and then the most influential with the politicians, ETC, the far left publication, they all went on attacking him, and the Swedes just voted with their wallet, and they grew his business even more. I said, okay, I'm going to donate to you. 10,000 krona as a donation is actually a joke. I mean, it's less than 1,000 euros. It's more like a token of appreciation.
That's just great. I mean, it does show us that even in Sweden, this sort of feminist hegemony is not nearly as strong as it appears in the media.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, most ordinary Swedes are still sort of normal people. They're not ideologues.
Absolutely, which is why we kept on saying in the previous years, especially during 2014, when everything looked just very bleak, and we kept on saying we just need a few big business owners to just say, fuck this shit, you're all insane. And that would be enough of it. And it turns out that it's actually true. I mean, there were those fine chaps from the Beachbody Ready. I forgot their product, but they had that ad, is your body Beachbody Ready or something like that.
Protein World.
Protein World, yes, that's right. Protein World. And when the SJWs picketed them, they were like, fuck off, we're going to just put a much bigger ad. That triggers you. Fine, let's put an ad that's the size of a 50-story building. How about that? They just doubled down on it, and then all the SJWs just disappeared, and they made more sales, and they sold a lot more product because of the controversy. Now this guy comes along and said feminism is cancer, hen and all that nonsense is insane, and you're all hate-filled. And they launch a huge campaign against him, and when he makes more money, he's like, oh, thank you all for making more money, I'm going to send you some cookies for that, and please try harder next time. That's exactly what has to be done. You just double down on them. And if more companies, I mean, the first steps are difficult. I mean, the first probably 15 companies that do that are risking the most, because at one moment, and I don't think that moment is really that far, maybe a few more years, but at one moment it will be just the standard to just double down on it if the left is triggered.
Yeah, that whole thing about apologizing, it often backfires. Probably apologizing for something like that just makes it even worse, because they just take it as an admission of guilt.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it comes from miscalculation. I mean, some companies genuinely believe that most of their customers are progressives, when in reality that just can't be true. I mean, yeah, sure, if you sell gender-certified cookies, then definitely most of your customers are progressive. But if you sell detergent and soap and whatnot, what dollar store sells, no, probably most of your customers are stay-at-home moms, old people, whatnot. Generally normal people, generally people who do their laundry at home. They don't have someone employed to do so, like the leftist elite in Sweden. So this guy probably already knew that most of my customers are actually normal people, and I don't lose anything by telling the leftists to fuck off. If more companies could just find a way to figure that out, that most of their clients are simply not progressive ideologues, that would be fantastic. Because in most cases, that's true, regardless of what your company sells. I mean, unless you sell gender-certified cookies or some very niche stuff, then probably most of your customers are simply not progressives, because progressives are not that many in any country. I mean, yeah, sure, they're the most in Sweden, but still, even in Sweden, they're probably like 25% of the populace, maybe 30. Still, that leaves a 2/3 majority of the country that is not. And in other countries like the United States, they're probably 5% of the populace at best.
Yeah. So my cookies are baked by 1/3 male employees, 1/3 female employees, and the other third non-gender conforming employees, and you have to refer to the cookies by the pronoun hen, so better watch out there.
Yeah, but still, I love that one. My cookies are gender certified and safe for non-binaries. That's it. That's it. And by the way, that thing called gender certification actually exists in Sweden. I'm not joking. There's also the certification that you're LGBT friendly. in Sweden. I'm not joking. The one with safe for non-binaries, this is the first time I hear it, but I wouldn't be surprised if that one existed too. I really wouldn't be surprised if it existed. And it basically just doubled down on it and mocked the whole narrative. Unsurprisingly, SVT didn't report this story with his numbers, but still, and probably this appears to be much larger in Sweden than anywhere else. I think I mentioned this in previous episodes as well. It's because you have a significant chunk of the press that is entirely or almost entirely subsidized by the state. I mean, it's not just SVT. I mean, these guys, ETC, also have most of their money, most of their funding comes from. Nobody actually reads that magazine. I mean, they print like 50,000 exemplars, and if they sell a tenth of it, that's fantastic, which they usually don't. I mean, nobody actually reads these places, but because they're given such a high importance by the state television, and they're also mostly funded by the taxpayers, they appear to be much bigger and much more influential than they actually are. I mean, at the very least, you have to give it to these conspiracist blogs like the New York Times or Washington Post. At least they tried to survive in the private market. Nobody reads those too, and those either. But at least they tried, and they got themselves established through market means. But these people, ETC, and there are many other, Expo magazine also in Sweden, nobody actually reads them, other than a very tiny minority of the politicians, and that's pretty much it. I mean, nobody actually reads them. Now, since they have become online, some non-leftists read them too, in the sense that let's see what happens in the La La Land race recently. But that's pretty much it. And this is why the progressive insanity appears to be much larger in Sweden. Well, it actually is in the media, in the cathedral media, as I say it. But it appears to be much bigger because these loons that nobody actually reads and cares about are propped up by the government using taxpayers' money. Whereas in Britain and in most of Europe, actually, yeah, you have the state television, but then everyone else is on their own.
Yep.
And as a result, these kinds of lunacies just don't rise up to such a prominent position. Maybe someone hears me and start cutting the press support. That's what they call the press support. If you have more than, I think, 10,000 subscribers or something like that, you can apply for state funding, basically. It's called the press support. Right. Let's go to the last one. The last one is remarkably long, but I think it's worth it. Coming from the Daily Mail. It's one of those classical articles that appears once in 6 or 8 months on the Daily Mail with yet another old feminist realizing that, oh my God, what we did might have been cancer. So it's from the same vein. Coming from the Daily Mail, will my baby granddaughter pay the price for my fight for equality? 60s feminist Jeanette Kupferman sees the emotional emptiness facing women today. The moment I held Amber Ann in my arms just minutes after her birth, an unexpected cocktail of emotions nearly floored me. What can best be described as a mixture of unbridled joy mingled with apprehension. My first grandchild was so perfectly formed, her eyes blinking in the bright hospital lights, her little fingers intertwined with mine. Of course, every baby is an individual miracle, but Amber was something of an actual miracle too, as my daughter-in-law, Eva, who suffered from endometriosis, I guess, had never believed she could conceive. Then suddenly she'd fallen pregnant, announcing it on my 75th birthday in a West End restaurant. I almost fell off my chair with excitement. Much as I'd always longed for grandchildren, when I turned 70, I'd almost given up. Both my son Elias, a historian, now 52, and daughter Minna, and an editor and photographer, 50, married late in life, and I knew the chances were diminishing. Yet here was Amber Ann, my son's first child, snuggling into my arms. But as she did so, the emotions were more complex and bittersweet than straightforward joy I'd anticipated. Of course, for now we can hold her safe, nurture her talents, and encourage her development, but what will her future hold? Just that morning, after another headline had caught my eye about schoolgirls feeling pressured to sleep with boys before they're ready, not to mention the endless stories about the increasing numbers of teenagers experiencing depression, self-harm, eating disorders, atrocious bullying, sexting, and gender uncertainty. It makes me wonder what happened to the brave new world we envisage for our daughters and granddaughters. A world of unlimited possibilities, choices, and equality for girls to become or do anything. A world I, like many other women, fought for in the 60s. Has feminism made life worse, not better, for today's generation of girls? Certainly, women have never existed in such a bleak, emotional landscape. The porn culture has virtually taken over every area of life, perhaps born from those 60s cries of sexual liberation that you should have as much sex as you like with whoever you like. Today, even the most intimate acts are lived out on screen. The ITV2 reality horror show Love Island, mercifully now finished, is just a culmination of years of the drip effect of pornography. It's bubble-wrapped candy floss with poison at its heart. Those involved might as well have been robots, as there was precious little love on the show. Meanwhile, traditional roles have become ever more ideologically despised, so much so that last week the very act of being a housewife or mother was banned from advertisements, for perpetuating quote-unquote outdated gender stereotypes. For all the efforts of feminism and the enlargement of women's opportunities, it seems it's also made that world more painful, complicated, and unrewarding. Burn your bras and wear miniskirts, we cried. Be free. But aren't young girls today just as imprisoned by the drive to bare their flesh as the cliched Victorian wife in crinolines? It's almost as compulsory for a young woman to take a pouting semi-naked selfie today as it was for a teenager in the 50s to wear bobby socks. It's somehow ironic that the one section of society which still dresses modestly, women and ethnic and religious minorities, say they do so to protect their sacred space as females. Meanwhile, the majority of other young women brutally expose their bodies, catering to every tawdry male fantasy as a side of their quote-unquote freedom. Who could have predicted such an obsession with thinness or worship of celebrities for the near Frankensteinian or outrages they inflict on their bodies? The growing sexualization of children continues with unsuitable tiny bra bikinis and makeup and sex education at an unnecessarily early age. TV and the internet expose children to everything from crude language to sexual practices. The things I worried about as a mother, such as failing exams, unwanted pregnancy, or drinking too much, seem tame. How I fear for Amber Ann in this age of endless choice and freedom. The well-meaning battles we embarked on in an idealistic youth have somehow robbed young women of the soul of femininity. We've lost something precious, distinctive, and unique. My own life, one where loss, hardship, and struggle has always played a part, has taught me that simple pleasures matter just as much. And that's the message I want now share with my granddaughter's generation. We're in danger of losing the essence of womanhood in this brutal landscape. And then she goes on in a personal story. Let's skip that. Later in her personal story, when boyfriends came along, aged about 14, via the youth club and jiving competitions, there was no compulsion to have sex. We wouldn't have dreamed of anything more than kissing in the cinema and sending passionate love letters. Virginity was still expected until an engagement was announced or some commitment made, and I had the sort of father who would stand waiting for me on the pavement after a date. A boy had to make some effort of courtship even to get that first kiss. Contrast this with the recent scenes in EastEnders, where a teenager agonizes over whether to strip off in reply to her new boyfriend's sexting and is given conflicting advice by friends as if it would be the most normal thing for a young girl to do. Would I want my granddaughter to think this was normal or even desirable? I feel so sad for young girls who will never receive a beautiful love letter or go on a romantic date with no strings attached. I didn't receive any sex education at school apart from basic biology. I had a rather awkward talk from my mother, but we picked up most of it from our friends and forbidden books. What we did know was that whatever the urge, you did not go all the way, as a pre-pill unwanted pregnancy was not only a disaster for the girl, but a tragedy for everyone involved. This attitude appears inhuman now, but I'm not sure it hasn't gone too far the other way, making for uncaring, short-lived relationships with teen girls, often the victims. I suppose the main difference is we had boundaries. We knew what was expected of us, even if we kicked against it. I meet so many young women who don't, and they grew up feeling confused and unhappy. We argued with our parents, often bitterly, but we still listened to them. We threatened to leave home, but mainly didn't, even if, like myself, you were a rebel. I annoyed my father with my black eyeliner, long fringe, and tendency to associate with unsuitable poets and jazz musicians. What the hell is it? Okay, but throughout, I wanted to please my parents. There was no diet industry. 3 square meals were put on the table daily, including thick soups, meat, potatoes, and 2 veg puddings with custard, and jam sandwiches to keep you going in between. We ate every bit and amazingly kept our tiny waists and figures without gyms or starvation, probably because we walked miles every day, danced a lot, and junk food was unknown. In my childhood, chubby babies were admired and even plump teens were reassured it was only puppy fat, which it usually was. Back in the era before liposuction, women weren't made to feel insecure about their figures. Obesity was unknown. How ironic that in our era of juice diets, toxins, and superfoods, women are fatter and unhappier with their bodies than ever. After studying anthropology at the London School of Economics, I became a dancer and a model for a while, escaped to New York, and briefly worked as a research librarian. Then I made my parents very happy by marrying my late husband, Jacques, a painter, finally returning to London and having two children by the age of 24. My unease at the consequences of the search for equality started to bubble to the surface in 1979 when I wrote my first book, The Mistaken Body. Many of its predictions have come true. Inspired by my own teacher, the great anthropologist Mary Douglas, with whom I studied at University College London, I could already see the women banging the drum for equality were going too far. The spiritual joys of physical pleasures of womanhood had become mechanized, as I put it then, things that needed rectifying with political schemes to make us more like men, or medical treatment to quell our hormones and control our childbirth pangs. Even birth has become too dominated by choice, overly technologized in the extreme. Once a midwife came to your home to help you through birth, now the quest for equality and medicalization and male involvement in this once female domain means many women have lost confidence in their capable bodies. Although it's seen as a great advance to involve fathers more in pregnancy and labor and to have surgical teams on standby to assist in any birth, in some ways this has eroded women's belief that she can do it alone. Can it then be any coincidence that a growing number of women are terrified by what was once the natural way of things and are having induced and difficult labors? What was once a woman's space has vanished. I felt so strongly about this that I trained as a National Childbirth Trust teacher and breastfeeding counselor, teaching at Hammersmith Hospital for a time to try to help women rediscover the joys of this most natural female act. It was an uphill battle. I have learned over the years that the quote-unquote stereotypical roles of femininity can give a sense of identity and security unmatched by anything in the corporate or professional world. After having my children, I got two further degrees, taught briefly, and then built up a career as a writer and broadcaster. Simultaneously, I tried to run a traditional household, cooking, entertaining, and finger painting with my toddlers. I often worked through the night and sometimes succumbed to the strain. But I was there for my children. This overarching lesson of my life is that the people in it matter, and my ability to be there for them as a woman, a wife, and mother in all and many and varied expressions of both those roles is vital. I learned that life turns on a sixpence, and sadly, you can lose one who you love. I was widowed young, aged 44, when Jacques died of cancer at 61. As a mother, I did overload my daughter with activities at times, encouraging her to aim high, perhaps placing a bit too much emphasis on work. But that was all part of the quote-unquote superwoman having it all ethic, which we now know isn't true. I've long been happy and secure enough in myself that I will don a penny, scrub a floor, make a jam, not seeing it as a threat to the other professional and public roles that I have. Indeed, I find it relaxing, almost spiritual in a way, to express myself as a woman in these traditional ways. We've forgotten that even everyday tasks can nourish the soul, and you can find contentment in the boring certainties. I hope my little Amber Ann discovers this too. Whatever she becomes, she can create a good home-cooked meal, sit quietly in the garden with a book, or enjoy a day at the seaside with her own children. I want her to feel euphoria because of the rare richness and uniqueness of life, and because of pride in her own innate womanhood, not be sozzled with booze or worse, ending up destroying body and soul in some demeaning, meaningless sexual encounter. A rich and rewarding life isn't one necessarily filled with endless choices. I hope she will have the luxury of more time than most girls today to have a stillness and peace that will encourage creativity and daydreaming. I want her not to be imprisoned by all those supposedly equal choices out there, but to be loyal to her true self. As a loving grandmother, my wish for her is not only to be kind, resilient, and resourceful, but above all, confident as a woman in every single sense of the word. So, Yon, I presume you're out. Okay. So first of all, this particular lady, has one third good ideas, one third wow, and one third is yeah, we told you so. James.
Yeah, I think Yana's trying to get back on.
Ah, okay. I thought you wanted to add this magnificent article because it
No,
will.
no. I
Because
really don't have anything to add to this one.
okay, it is really magnificent in a way. I mean, she has a point when she bats on the superwoman narrative, but otherwise, I don't know. I mean, complaining that oh, the birth process has become over mechanized and whatnot. Yeah, it's called reducing the infant mortality rate. How is that a bad thing? Still trying to figure out whether Jon is still around or not.
Yeah, we may have lost him.
He he muted himself and then unmuted himself, but for some reason we can't hear him. So yeah. But anyway, so the complaint about the mechanization of childbirth is a little bit silly. I mean, I can understand where she's coming from. She's coming from, oh, we wanted to just, like Erin Pittsy explained to us, in the 70s, you needed the approval of your husband or a male guardian to open a bank account, which I think is silly. And she's basically coming from that tradition of we wanted to be able to set up our own bank accounts. We didn't actually want to be men. So I definitely understand where she's coming from. But from there to go to complain that oh my god, this over mechanization in childbirth, yeah, that's a bit silly. I mean, I can understand why some individual women might think that's a bit going too far, but on the other hand, that quote unquote mechanization exists there precisely so both you and your progeny gets to stay alive and get out alive from that hospital. I mean, yeah, sure. There are no solutions, only trade-offs, and most of everyone in the civilized world have figured that it's a superior trade-off to have fewer people, fewer women, and fewer newly born children die. Just so, in general, the quote-unquote female space be respected. Most of the civilized world were like the hell with the female space. Let's make sure fewer people die, and that's fantastic. I mean, I'm sorry, but it just is fantastic overall. On the other hand, the rest of it, I have to admit, but again, I'm a bit biased because I'm much more socially conservative than I usually let it look like. But most people have a perception that social conservatives are like those virgin when they're married and things like that. That's not how it works. It's just like thou shalt keep thy degeneracy for thyself. Yeah, I actually do understand where she's coming from when she complains about too much sexuality in public life and whatnot. What makes her special is that unlike other feminists, she actually puts the blame where it is, namely on feminism, because there was no other force in society in the last several decades, that actually said it is okay to have so much sexualization everywhere. It was feminism and feminism only that insisted that's fantastic. I mean, not even social liberals of the 50s approved of that. I mean, if you ask a liberal, as liberals were in the 60s and 70s, even they would say, yeah, maybe public pornography, yeah, that's a bit too much. Yeah. I mean, even the most quote unquote tolerant people of the 60s and 70s would be considered, far right Puritans these days. But the general rule was that whatever you do it in private, you do it in your house. You don't display so much of it everywhere. But nowadays, I understand the frustration of this particular lady, even if I don't necessarily agree entirely with her. I understand where she's coming from. On the other hand, I don't think there is necessarily so much um, more of it in the sense of how teenagers perceive it. I mean, she says here, oh, the endless stories about yeah, there are the endless stories, but that doesn't necessarily mean there's more teenagers experiencing depression, self-harming, eating disorders, atrocious bullying. Maybe the gender uncertainty part, yeah, that's definitely happening a lot more today than 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. But self-harming and especially atrocious bullying, actually those were remarkably common even 40 years ago.
Yeah. Can you hear me
Oh,
now?
yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. I don't know what happened there.
I don't know how much of what I said you've heard, but go ahead.
Every single time people say all these stories, got to remember we're living in the information age.
Yep.
All these
Yep.
stories are exactly at our fingertips. 40, 50 years ago, it was whatever your local newspaper published.
Yeah.
And especially
And if it was big enough, it was on the nighttime news.
Yeah.
Now, it's every forum you look in. It's on Reddit. It's on YouTube. It's on Google.
we've also become a lot more sensitized to things like bullying and violence. So something like I don't know, two men getting in a fist fight at a bar used to be something that was considered like more normal back in the day. It's
Not news.
not a big deal.
Yeah.
Because nowadays it's this sort of stuff is taken a lot more seriously. Same for bullying. That's something that I guess that's happened all the time. We just it was just kids being kids, and that's just what happens. You
We
just have
called
to,
it life.
yeah.
I have to admit that I am not that empathetic when it comes to bullying. Not because I don't believe the quote-unquote victims. Certainly, some cases seem very extreme, even by my unempathetic standard. But there has come to a point, particularly in Britain, in Canada, in New Zealand in particular. I read some bullying guidelines, and I'm like, I would be fired from school from grade 1 if I were to be a kid again in New Zealand. The sense, the wideness, I guess, of the concept of bullying has been expanded so much that now basically, literally, kids being kids is considered bullying now.
Yeah, they can definitely overdo it, and
Yeah.
it's no good to overprotect children, because they do need to be able to learn to deal with conflict. Only when it comes to only when it becomes too bad should authorities try to step in there. And
Yeah, I mean, you can
most
get
of the sort of
expelled
conflicts,
because you taunted your colleague in grade 2. That's in New Zealand. And I'm like, I would have been expelled a billion times before I graduated the 4th grade. I mean, serious? I can understand the situations where, one pupil ends up hospitalized or something like that. Yeah, that's horrible. And that's definitely a case where authorities should intervene. But, basic stuff, kids taunting each other and things like that, yeah, no, maybe you should leave them alone. And in the UK, there are many schools that have abolished recess altogether so they can avoid bullying instances. And I'm like, no, that's making a lot worse than it previously were. No matter how much bullying you had, you were better off with recess and bullying than without it.
Yeah, let's just take children and just put them in the classroom, and after that we just put each child in a padded cell so that no interaction with other children is possible, and that way we just eliminate all bullying.
Yeah. It just comes from this understanding that the lack of understanding that there are no solutions, only trade-offs, and some trade-offs are just not acceptable. By eliminating bullying, you can make some things better, but only by making other things worse. And by trying to eliminate bullying altogether, you actually make everything else a lot worse. Anyway, anything to say about her general impression? That I presume you already read the article. You didn't have to listen to me reading it.
Yeah, I think your characterization of 1/3 reasonable, 1/3 was it said 1/3 crazy, and 1/3 unreasonable. That seems to be about right. In particular, the stuff that you highlighted with the with birth being demystified and so on. That's
and mechanized. Yeah,
mechanized. I mean, during all the millennia when childbirth was in the domain of women, you had these huge levels of infant mortality, lots of women dying in childbirth, and then just as you bring in male doctors, all sorts of new procedures get invented, all sorts of new methods that dramatically cut down infant mortality, that dramatically cut down women dying in childbirth. And yes, maybe it's less personalized, and maybe it's colder and more mechanized. But I'd rather have a cold and mechanized birth than dying in childbirth.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the difference between the country with the least amount of childbirth and the highest amount of childbirth in Europe is like it's made in 1 or 2 cases per 100,000. So, basically everywhere this mechanization was allowed to happen, death in childbirth and infant mortality became a thing of it barely happens. Sometimes you have like 2 cases per year in a country of 15 million people. That's amazing. That's fantastic. And instead of praising that, you're like, oh my God, I'm losing my female space. Get lost. Get lost.
Yeah.
sorry, no empathy there. But on the sexualization part, I liked it that she puts the blame on feminism in particular, because it is. I mean, feminism was the only force in society in the 70s and 60s that insisted on this. Every other force, including liberals at the time, were not particularly convinced that over sexualization of everything is really fantastic.
Yeah.
And she's right on point on this particular. The traditional roles have become more ideologically despised. That's actually true. We spoke about this several times in our shows. I mean, this is a very old feminist, and she's like, "Why? What do you mean ban being a wife from advertisement? That's insane." And she's right on point on that. As for the women feeling, I presume she doesn't really necessarily rely on data, but there is data to back it up that women are in a worse emotional state now than 50 years ago, at least in North America, where they've been gathering these data of measuring population happiness for a lot more than we did in Europe.
Yeah, it's also not just in the United States, also in various other industrialized countries. Sort of the reported happiness of women has gone down both in absolute terms and relative to men.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, this sort of happiness research is quite dubious, because what does it mean to say, rate your happiness on a scale of 1 to 10 or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
What does it actually mean? And is it constant over time? Is it constant across different countries? Is it constant across men and women? Who knows?
Yeah. Right. Okay, we've reached the 120th minute mark. I'll still be here on August the 11th. I'm leaving to Georgia a little bit later than that. So definitely, if you guys are here, then we can definitely have another episode this month.
I'm here.
Okay.
Please.
And I'm pretty much out of things to say, but I'm sure you have one thing to say.
I would invite you to come visit my blog, which is at orthogonalideas.com. And then I'll see you next week. And until then, take the red pill.
Take the red pill. Goodbye, everyone.